cold today.
It was brisk, yeah.
So in the 1930s, tuberculosis was ripping through the country. The highly contagious disease was virtually untreatable. Tuberculosis, or TB, is a bacterial infection that usually affects the lungs, but it can also affect the spine, kidneys, the brain, and so on. And due to its highly contagious nature, in the early 19th century, those who had contracted TB were forcibly removed from society, and they were placed in sanatoriums across the United States. One of those sanatoriums that popped up across the U.S. was Molly Stark Hospital here in Stark County, Ohio. It opened in August of 1929 at a cost of $1 million to care for those in Stark County who were afflicted with the disease. Many of us, when we think of tuberculosis, we harken back to our favorite character in the movie Tombstone. The real Doc Holliday did in fact die from tuberculosis at Glenwood Springs Sanatorium in Colorado. By the early 19th century, tuberculosis, or consumption as it was called, had killed 1 in 7 people who had ever lived. 1 in 7 people who ever lived on this planet had died via consumption tuberculosis. The reason it's called consumption, or was called consumption, is because the disease looked as if it was consuming the body. I mean, it ravaged the body so hard that people lost weight to the point of almost emaciation. And until they found a cure, it was thought that a treatment of sunshine and fresh air was what was best for patients who had contracted tuberculosis. These sanatoriums were touted to be hospitals for the treatment of the disease, but the truth is, science hadn't caught up to the reality of the disease yet.
The construction on the buildings began in the 1920s. The price tag at that time was well over $1 million, which was pre-Depression money. So, that's an astronomically different amount now. The hospital itself opened in 1929, and then there was construction that happened afterwards. During the Depression, WPA built tunnels underneath the grounds to connect the dormitories to the hospital that are still here to this day underneath us. And then I believe later into the 40s and 50s, they built the 2 wings off of the hospital that have a much different architecture to it.
So that building you see right there in the distance is the old children's hospital associated with Molly Stark. Now that is considerably, that's probably about 100 yards or so away from the main building itself. In 1938, about 1,200 feet of underground tunnels were installed. These tunnels helped by providing quicker and easier means of traveling between multiple buildings. This helped greatly on cold and rainy days. Whew, is it cold today, I'll tell you.
The architecture, as far as the building goes, they went under a theory that the sunlight helped the patients. And being outdoors, being in the rural area, would not only bring happiness to the patients versus being confined into a city somewhere, but also that the nature of things would help their progression through the illness. They were originally made so that the upper floors were actually where the worst patients were, and as you progressed and got better, they brought you down closer to the grounds with the idea that you would be able to roam the grounds when you were almost well enough to go home again.
Fresh air, comfort, steady meals, yeah, they did contribute to a patient initially feeling better. But remember, this was around the time of the Great Depression. Most TB patients lived in urban areas that were poor and lacked proper sanitation or access to good nutrition. The horrors of Molly Stark, they were in the false hope that were given to the patients who had TB. They were told that the fresh air cure would save them from the debilitating disease, but that wasn't the case at all. Unfortunately, patients who eventually made their way down a couple floors, maybe even to the first floor, soon started succumbing to the disease and started working their way back up to the top. Why name a hospital, a sanatorium, in the middle of Stark County, Ohio, Molly Stark Hospital? Well, the answer to that question takes us back to the American Revolutionary War in the year 1777 at the Battle of Bennington in Vermont. John Stark, a major general in the Continental Army, and the man who coined the phrase "live free or die," became widely known as the hero of Bennington for his accomplishments during the battle. A battle that is considered the turning point of the entire Revolutionary War that ultimately led to the defeat of the British and the freedom of the colonies from British rule. Before engaging the British and Hessian army, John rallied his troops yelling out, "There are your enemies, the Redcoats and the Tories. They are ours, or this night Molly Stark sleeps a widow." Molly, John's wife, gained her notoriety in the battle, as well as her success as a nurse to her husband's troops during a smallpox epidemic and for opening their home as a hospital during the war. The Starks were so beloved by the nation for their heroism that there are locations and landmarks named for them in at least 4 states. The settlers who came to this area of Ohio named this county after their beloved John Stark, and later, in 1929, named this hospital after Molly, a fitting tribute to a remarkable woman. In 1952, the east and west wings of the hospital would see additions. These additions were made to expand the facility's overall patient capacity from 150 to 230 patients. It also added a larger laundry and kitchen space. One of the first applications of antibiotic medicines used after World War II was for treatment of tuberculosis, and the drugs signaled an end to quarantines. In the 1950s, advancement in antibiotics gave patients the ability to treat themselves from home. And because of that, Molly Stark ceased operating as a sanatorium. In 1956, the name had been changed to Molly Stark Hospital as they started to provide treatment for care for other medical cases, aside from TB?
After the tuberculosis pandemic got more under control going into the 50s, early 60s, the role of the hospital changed. It was more for developmentally challenged, the mentally ill, not in the sense of an insane asylum, but more in the along the lines of developmental disabilities. This became a home for them. Between that and it also became a county-run nursing home. So it sort of transitioned into that period, serving a dual role that way. As the decades went on and it was getting more into the 80s, it became an outpatient center for alcohol addiction, drug addiction, things like that. The nursing home stayed until I believe the mid to late 1980s when the center next to it was built. And then folks were moved out into that.
The building has seen more than its fair share of death, which would lead some to assume that there are spirits that roam its corridors.
After it was shut down as a hospital, it was used to hold records for the Stark County Sheriff's Department, things like that. People who came in doing various things said that one of the major things was that the elevators would run on their own. Day and night, the elevators would go from floor to floor. There's a lot of sightings of apparitions, faces in the windows, things like that folks have seen. There have been sounds, there have been, your general little things, but then sometimes seeing lights. I know that there was a period of time when the neighbors that live across the street and things like that would see lights on inside the building long after the building no longer had electricity. I know that there was a period in the late 90s, early 2000s when it was only being held as a record-keeping thing. I myself would drive down the road at night sometimes and see lights on the lower floor that looked like they were on.
In 2015, the local newspaper ran a story about the hauntings of Molly Stark, which listed a surprising group of supernatural witnesses. All 4 witnesses were law enforcement officers, including a former county sheriff and a city police chief. The legend of Molly Stark Hospital includes the sounds of chains, bodiless elevators operating, ghostly figures peering out windows, and a voice heard by one of the lawmen stationed there. Andrew Turowski, the Louisville police chief, found himself alone at Molly Stark. The Metro unit worked in a wing attached to the primary building. He certainly heard and saw things that he is at a loss to explain. He stated it was common to hear things on the floors above, especially furniture moving. Even the police dog was aware of a strange presence. One thing that always struck him as odd is periodically the dog would just kind of stand up in the office and walk to the door and look down the hallways, and all the hair on the back of its neck would stand up, and it would howl only in a way that he would howl in that hospital. Steve Reedy, the former sheriff's inspector, had stayed at the Stark Metropolitan Narcotics Unit office late one night in 2001. Other investigators had left. The rest of the building was desolate. He was sitting at his desk doing work, and a voice called his name. He answered, "Yeah," and there was no response. He looked up and no one was there. He didn't recognize the voice, so he got up and checked the hall to see if anybody was there. He was alone. It sent chills up his spine, and needless to say, he gathered up his things and left. In the year 2000, Sheriff Swanson escorted a small group of jail inmates inside a sprawling building, searching for furniture and other things to sell at auction. They were on the first floor in one of the hallways, and all of a sudden they heard a bed being dragged across the room of an upper floor. Deputies and inmates traced the origin of the mysterious noise to an upper floor. They could see where the bed had been dragged through the dust by the marks on the floor. The building was vacant. Nobody had separated from the group. Dennis Pellegrino was the only officer to spend the night inside the fortress. Metro had just set up offices in the East Wing. The alarm system was not connected yet, so he slept there 2 nights, protecting the guns and evidence. But he didn't sleep well. Pipes and joints creaked and groaned. The boiler system kicked on in small hours of the night, the ancient structure coming to life. Noises were heavy. About 2:30 a.m., unable to doze off, he heard a scraping noise upstairs. When he investigated, a solitary bed had been moved. From an earlier trip to that room, he knew exactly where the bed had been located. More intriguing was what occurred during a SWAT training exercise. Pellegrino didn't see it, but another officer said he witnessed a man in a brown suit dart across the hallway. That coincided with rumors of a brown-suited man peering out a window. In April of 2009, Stark Parks purchased the building for $1 and eventually opened Molly Stark Park, complete with walking paths, picnic tables, grills, and of course a great view of the former hospital. Today, behind its towering brick walls is a Molly Stark that many wouldn't recognize. Age and arson have rotted Molly Stark from the inside. Ribbons of old paint stream from the ceilings and walls, and patches of moss grow on the terrazzo flooring, where metal-framed beds once held the infirmed.
You know that feeling you get when you feel like someone's watching you? And then it goes for a little while and starts to feel really creepy and the hair stands up on the back of your neck. This place will do that to you. I've been here a couple times walking around, and I swear there's somebody looking out a window at me. When I turn and look up, there's nobody there. I think the real horror of this hospital is the pain and suffering that the early inhabitants had to go through before there was an actual cure for tuberculosis. So if you want to hear something truly terrifying, tuberculosis is still the #1 infectious disease killer in the world, killing about 1.5 million people per year. The reality is, as long as the bacteria lives inside you, you are at risk for contracting the disease. Now that's truly a scary Halloween ending. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing. If you would, please give me a like and a comment. Comment down below would be great. I love reading your comments and I try to answer back every single time. All right. Thanks for watching, folks. I'm off to my next adventure. See ya. I can't talk today. It's too cold. That's right. I'm gonna throw you to the dogs. Treat themselves and recover from the comfort of them home, So although living conditions can affect the infection rate, the truth is there are many people who are talking off camera who don't know that I'm talking on camera, and they're ruining my take. I can't win. Not today. The reality is, as long as the something. So although living conditions can affect the infection, who wrote this?
Yes.
Where you could actually wheel the people out into the sunlight on the balconies, and they believed that would help with the exhaust fumes. It would help with the exhaust fumes.
I think the real horror of this hospital, or sanatorium as it was called, is something that I can't remember right now. It doesn't make any sense because I wrote the script. That. I love it when I generate my own outtakes.
Yeah.
So stupid.
It's something that I literally read moments ago.
Right.
But it is gone.
Not only did I read it moments ago,
I
wrote it days ago.
Right
here.
It's your first time seeing it.
Agreed. Tuberculosis is still the words?
Words.
Words are something
You're killing the words. It might be the world's killer, but you're the words killer today.
Take 74. Good God.
That's good stuff.
I can't stop smiling.
I know. Now you're all jolly talking about this atrocity.
1.5 million.
Yeah.
I have.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
No, Gabaga.
There's no way.
I don't even know if I'm in frame anymore.
You're good.
And there's wind. I actually made it through that sentence.
Wow, did it.
Although living conditions can play a part in TB and something else that I can't remember. Now that is truly a Halloween ending.
ND filter.
Do me a favor and press pause, please, Mr. Cameraman, because this is